When a pair of guards tried to remove a black Marine from his son's graduation, no one anticipated 6 Navy SEALs would rise silently and bring the entire auditorium to a standstill. Solomon Dryden didn't expect to be noticed when he pulled into the back lot of Elmridge High. The school resembled many others in small town Texas: faded red brick, a few flags waving over the entrance, and kids lingering near the gym doors. The place was already buzzing: parents in collared shirts, younger siblings holding glittery signs, a grandmother steadying herself on a walker. All the usual scenes. He parked his Dodge Charger beside the chain link fence and stepped out, adjusting the crisp lines of his deep blue Marine dress uniform. His boots gleamed like glass, not out of vanity, but because excellence was instinctive. Halfway to the entrance, he paused and took in his surroundings. His upright stance made him stand out. Though his expression was composed, it carried the depth of a man who had lived many lives. He'd driven 8 hours from Temple just to see his son graduate. Flying was faster, but the Charger had been his wife's favorite. Even 2 years after her death, the road made him feel close to her. Solomon opened the door again and pulled a small, creased photo from the glove box. His wife cradled baby Tyron in it. He tucked it into his inside pocket. "I told you," he murmured, "I'd be here." He approached the entrance with measured steps, each one deliberate. Something filled his chest. Not quite pride, not quite sorrow, but a blend of both. Inside, the gym buzzed with energy. Folding chairs covered the floor, bleachers were overflowing, and the air held a mix of popcorn, floor cleaner, and excitement. Solomon handed his printed ticket to a volunteer near the doorway, a short man juggling a clipboard and headset. He peered at it, gave a quick nod, and gestured to the 3rd row on the left. "You're all set. Family seating's right up front." "Thank you," Solomon replied, calm and clear. He walked to his seat, passing clusters of families. Some people glanced his way, then quickly turned aside after noticing his uniform. One woman smiled faintly and whispered to her companion. Solomon didn't respond. He'd been tall, black, and in uniform long enough to read those looks for what they were, and what they weren't. He found his spot and sat. The chair wobbled slightly. He steadied it and said nothing. Ahead, the stage was ready. Silver letters spelled out class of 2024 across the gym wall. A few school board members stood at the podium, shuffling their cue cards. Solomon's gaze moved to the line of graduates in the far corner. Tyron was somewhere in the middle, lanky, tall, and carrying his mother's eyes. 18 years, gone in a blink. He remembered holding that baby in his arms the day he was born. Still in his fatigues, dirt under his nails, having flown straight from Okinawa with only a 4-day pass. And now they were here. Solomon barely moved. He sat motionless, eyes steady, capturing every second. Behind him the gym filled, chairs dragged, people chatted. Someone dropped a coffee cup and cursed under their breath. None of it reached him. His entire focus was on the stage, the row of young faces, and the photo pressing lightly against his chest. Then the music began, pomp and circumstance, and the crowd rose to their feet. Some students looked nervous, others beamed. Solomon stood as well, posture perfect, arms by his sides. The national anthem followed. Hands rose to chests. Solomon stayed still. He didn't need to move. His entire presence was its own salute. He thought of his wife again, of how she would have cried through the whole ceremony, fixing Tyron's tie 3 times before letting him leave the house. His gaze didn't waver, but as the anthem's final note echoed, 2 uniformed men entered the side aisle, headed straight for him. The security guards moved with determination. They weren't cops. Their black polos read Harlan Security Services, tucked into standard, tissue cargo pants. Radios clipped to belts, earpieces in place. Neither looked older than 31. He was stocky, broad, shouldered, with a shaved head and a stiff expression. His partner stood taller, thinner, lazily chewing gum like he'd rather be somewhere else. Solomon spotted them immediately, but remained still. His military discipline had long taught him that silence and composure could speak louder than words or movement. He kept facing forward, hands resting loosely on his thighs. The shorter of the two leaned down just enough to speak discreetly. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us," he murmured. Solomon slowly turned his head. "Is there an issue?" The lanky one stepped in. "Yeah, this section's reserved for families of graduates." Solomon gave a single blink, then calmly reached into his coat and pulled out the same printed ticket he'd already shown at the door. "This is my assigned seat. 3rd row, left side, confirmed as family seating." The short guard didn't even glance at the ticket. "We were told this area's full." Solomon didn't budge. "It was already full when I sat down. Care to tell me who gave that directive?" The taller man shifted his weight, caught off guard by the poise and clarity in Solomon's tone. "Look, it's not a big thing. There's open seating in the back. Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be." Solomon's eyes narrowed, not with hostility, but measured thought. "I drove 8 hours to watch my son walk that stage. I'll be sitting here." People nearby were starting to notice. A woman nudged her husband and gestured subtly toward them. Someone in the bleachers angled their phone, perhaps recording. The short guard straightened up and scanned the crowd. "Sir, I'm asking one more time. You can ask all you want." Solomon replied, his voice quieter now but firm. "I'm staying put." The tall one made a small sound of annoyance. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back. That's all we're suggesting." And there it was. Solomon turned his gaze on him completely now. That line wasn't about procedure or protocol. It spoke to something deeper, older, a quiet implication he'd encountered throughout his life, in offices, waiting rooms, front porches, even military mess halls. It hovered just beneath a polite smile, barely whispered. He said nothing. The atmosphere in the room shifted, that subtle way people can feel when something inappropriate has just occurred. The short guard sensed it too and adjusted the radio on his belt, speaking into it without looking away. Solomon remained seated, eyes forward. As far as he was concerned, the exchange was over. The elderly white woman sitting next to him leaned over and whispered, "Don't let them move you." He gave her a small nod, not speaking. He wasn't here to cause a scene, only to witness his son's milestone like any father should. But the guards persisted. "If you've got an issue, take it up with the office," the tall one said again, this time in a lowered voice. "We're just doing what we were told." Solomon turned to him once more. "You got a name, son." The guard blinked. "It's Officer Malley." "Not an officer," Solomon corrected. "Your private security." At that, the short one stepped in. "All right, that's enough. If you don't stand." He didn't finish, because at that moment the gym door at the far end opened with a click, and 6 men entered. No uniforms, no badges, just upright postures, squared shoulders, and faces that carried the quiet weight of experience. They didn't enter in a line but drifted in separately, each taking a different seat, as if unrelated. But anyone watching carefully could tell. They moved the same, watched the room the same, and sat the same, steady and vigilant. Solomon didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew who they were. The guards didn't, at least not yet. Still staring straight ahead, Solomon kept his composure. His expression didn't change, but inside, something clicked into place. A mental gear he reserved for situations requiring calm under pressure. Not rage, just readiness, control, survival. The guards lingered. Their stance wasn't about duty anymore. It had shifted into something else, a need to show who held authority. But what they didn't grasp was that Solomon had lived in places where authority wasn't symbolic. It was survival in real time. This wasn't that. A name was announced on stage, and the audience applauded politely. But attention had drifted. People nearby were watching the tension unfolding near the front. some subtly, some openly. Mally adjusted his stance again. He leaned in, voice hushed now. "I'm trying to help you, man. This doesn't have to get ugly." Solomon's eyes flicked over to him. "You're not in a position to offer that kind of favor." A brief silence followed. Mally stepped back slightly, clearly weighing his options, but the other one, Garvin, as his badge read, wasn't as measured. He didn't like being questioned. His fingers hovered once more near the radio behind them. A man slowly rose to his feet. No one noticed right away. He stayed quiet, simply folding his arms and locking eyes on the scene. Muscular build, clean cut, sharp gaze. He quietly took a seat near the aisle, his attention unmoving across the gym. A second man stood. This one mirrored the first, same composed stance, same watchful stillness. Then a third rose too. None of them spoke. They didn't have to. Solomon recognized everyone. He didn't need to look back to confirm his gut already knew. He'd led these men through nightmares, mud, bullets, and silence, thicker than most people could comprehend. Garvin leaned closer again, but this time his tone was different. "Listen, man. You're blowing this up into more than it needs to be." Solomon turned his head slowly, deliberately. "And you're still not hearing me." Garvin's hand twitched, reaching again for his radio, but before he could speak, a calm voice cut the tension from 10 feet away. "Is there a reason this gentleman is being bothered?" It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed like a pin drop in a quiet room. All eyes turned to the man standing in the center aisle, tall, salt-tanned, pepper beard, black coat draped over a gray shirt. His name was Creed Marston. Years ago, Solomon had carried him out of hell, dragging him across a battlefield in Kandahar, through sand and shrapnel. Garvin glanced up, taken off guard. "Who are you?" he asked. Creed didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward again. "I asked you a question." Mally lifted a hand. "Sir, it's under control." "No," Creed replied curtly. "You're losing it." From the bleachers, another man stood, then another. 4 of them now. Solomon still hadn't moved, still silent, but now nearly everyone on the gym's left side was watching intently. A boy pointed. A teacher waved toward the stage, trying to steer attention back. But the diplomas were no longer the focus. Creed moved one step closer. "You're humiliating yourselves, and about one breath away from making it worse." Garvin looked to Mally, who now seemed visibly shaken. This wasn't the resistance they expected, and definitely not the type. "I don't care what orders you were given," Creed said flatly. "You don't touch that man. You don't ask him to move. You don't ask again." The silence that followed wasn't laced with fear, but something weightier. Respect. It spread through the crowd as people started to grasp what they were witnessing. Solomon finally lifted his head, gave Creed a small nod. Not thanks, not permission, just acknowledgement. Creed's face softened for a second. Then he returned to his seat, arms folded, but the air still hummed with tension. The audience waited, watching to see what the security guards would do next. The gym faded, the stage, the banners, the faces all dissolved from Solomon's view. His eyes stayed open, but his thoughts were pulled backward, 15 years into the past. Afghanistan, Kandahar province, late afternoon. The sun didn't drift down there. It slammed into the horizon, turning the sky red, and the ground hard like iron. Solomon was a gunnery sergeant, then just finishing a unit briefing when chaos hit. An ID detonated beneath the lead hum, be flipping it like scrap metal sand, and steel rained down before anyone had time to scream. Then came the bullets, not random, coordinated. Solomon didn't hesitate, dropped behind a broken door frame, assessing the damage. Smoke blurred the edge of the ravine, but he could see them. 6 men down, stuck near a burning vehicle, one already crawling, dragging someone else by the vest. That was Creed, only a few months into deployment, and already shot through the leg. Solomon dashed into open fire. No second thoughts, no comms, just instinct. He dropped behind debris. Creed looked up, blood streaking his face, breathing heavy. "You're bleeding," Solomon said. "Took you long enough." Creed gasped. Solomon grabbed the gear of the other Marine beside them, Enrique Soto, and started pulling. Creed pushed himself forward, wincing. "Where's Divas?" Solomon shouted. Creed pointed weakly left side. Under the hood, Solomon spotted him, a young SEAL caught beneath the engine block, hit leg pinned, screaming, but unable to move. Solomon didn't hesitate. Solomon told Creed, Stay low and move when I move. Creed gave a quick nod, and that was when he truly began to understand what leadership really meant. Solomon bolted across the open space again, his foot crunching on something. Stone, maybe bone. But he didn't hesitate. He skidded beside Divas, crouched down, and grabbed the twisted hood with both hands. It wouldn't budge. Gunny, don't. Divas yelled, I'm good, I'm good. You're not staying here, Solomon said, planting one foot deep into the dirt and heaving upward. His shoulders burned, ribs screamed, but the hood finally groaned upward, just enough for Divas to yank his leg out. They toppled back together, crawling toward the ridge as bullets whizzed past overhead. Creed limped back with Soto in tow, leaning hard on his uninjured leg. Two more followed, Lim and Horton, faces smeared with soot, weapons raised. When the shooting finally stopped, there were no cheers or cries of victory, only silence, heavy breathing. All six had survived. Solomon was the last to leave the field, staying behind to cover them until the dust cleared and the medevac arrived. He didn't speak much afterward, but Creed never forgot. None of them did. From that moment on, no matter what, if Solomon ever called, they'd show up, anywhere, anytime, without hesitation. Back in the school gym, Creed sat still, eyes locked on the guards still hovering by Solomon. He wasn't thinking about combat. He was thinking about loyalty. The man who pulled him out of a battlefield was now being hassled for simply wanting to watch his child graduate. Creed clenched his fists. Another SEAL Javier Meek centered and took a seat 4 rows back. Then Zachary Wells slipped into the side bleachers. Neither said a word, they didn't have to. Solomon's gaze flicked briefly toward the back. His eyes found Meek's, and that was enough. The guards had no idea what those glances meant, but they'd learn soon. The ceremony continued on, at least outwardly. Names still echoed from the stage. Families applauded, some louder than necessary, as if trying to drown out the mounting tension, but the focus had shifted. Where once everyone stared at the stage, more and more eyes were tracking toward the 3rd row, left side, where Solomon sat immovable, and 2 guards stood unsure of their next move. Garvin glanced forward toward a school official trying to catch his eye. She seemed worried, mouthing silent words and making small gestures toward him and his partner. Garvin shook his head. He wasn't backing down. He'd started this, and pride wouldn't let him stop. Mally shifted again, chewing his gum faster, clearly rattled but not stepping away. Sir, Garvin said, louder this time, this is your final warning. Solomon didn't budge. Final warning to do what, exactly? Garvin leaned so far forward, his utility belt brushed Solomon's knee. To stop making a scene. We don't want trouble. Just move to the back. Solomon turned slowly and locked eyes with him. You're the only one making trouble. Garvin's face tightened, then he let it slip. You think wearing that uniform makes you better than the rest of us. This is a high school, not some military base. The rows around them fell silent. A little girl stopped fidgeting. A father holding a camera froze mid-zoom. Even Mally stepped back slightly, as if realizing that line had gone too far. Solomon didn't blink. He took a breath, not to relax, but to stay centered. You need to leave, he said, but Garvin didn't. His hand dropped to his belt, not reaching for a weapon, but close enough to feel like a threat. That's when Creed stood, no yelling, no puffed chest, just a deliberate, calm rise into the aisle, like the matter now involved him. The gym wasn't silent, but nearly. Creed's voice rang clear. If you lay a hand on him, you'll answer to me. Garvin turned, scowling, and who the hell are you? Creed stepped closer. The man telling you this ends now. Up front, a school board member noticed the tension and murmured something to the principal. An assistant principal stood and hurried toward the rear, pressing a button on her walkie. It was finally dawning on the school staff that this wasn't going away quietly. More SEALs stood across the gym, not in any planned formation, not by command, but by shared instinct. By now, all 6 were on their feet. Garvin looked around, realizing this wasn't just some upset father. Something was different. These men didn't shuffle. They didn't fidget. They didn't blink. Their presence settled over the room like the heaviness before a downpour. Creed moved a little closer. "You've got two options," he said. "Back off now, or let this turn into something you won't be able to handle." Mally finally broke the silence, his voice unsteady. "Let's just walk away, man." But Garvin held his ground. Solomon spoke again, not addressing Garvin this time, but looking at Creed. "Don't bother. He made his call already." Creed didn't grin. Instead, his voice dropped once more. "Don't confuse quiet with weakness." At last, Garvin backed down. Not much, but enough. His hand left his belt, his face hot with frustration. He was outnumbered and outmatched. The principal stepped quietly into the aisle and murmured something to both guards. Whatever it was, she said it softly but firmly, and they turned and walked toward the back exit. Neither made eye contact with anyone on their way out. Solomon let out a slow, even breath. Creed returned to his chair without speaking. The 6 SEALs stayed standing, their presence still thick in the air. From the students' lineup, Tyron Drayton had seen everything. His fists were clenched at his sides. Standing halfway down the row, Tyron waited between a girl with colorful braids and a boy struggling to keep his gown up. They tried focusing on the ceremony, chuckling nervously and fiddling with their name cards like nothing was wrong. But Tyron knew it was. He noticed the guards approach his dad the second the anthem ended. At first, he hoped they were just helping someone find a seat, but his gut told him otherwise. He saw the way his father sat, rigid, composed, locked in place. That expression wasn't new. Tyron remembered it from when he was 12 and came home in tears after hearing something cruel at school. His dad hadn't raised his voice then, either. Just sat still, steady as steel. Tyron did his best to keep eyes on the situation from where he stood. He couldn't make out the words, but the way people moved told him everything. The guards leaned in too close. His father stayed calm and grounded. Then a man stood up, all in a dark coat. Tyron didn't know him, but instantly felt the connection. That wasn't a stranger. That man knew his dad. He placed himself in the path of the guard. No noise, no drama, and then another rose, and then another. It wasn't loud, but the room changed. Something shifted. People were watching now. Tyron's chest thudded. Not from fear, but something more complicated. A swirl of pride and fire. He'd grown up hearing fragments of his dad's time in the military. Not the worst bits, those were left untold, but moments here and there. A friend who sent a Christmas card every December, a faded scar from some place buried in sand, a taped-up box in the garage labeled Kandahar that no one opened. He'd never known the names, hadn't seen their faces. Until now, and here they were, standing tall like they'd been waiting for this day. Like they'd never stopped having Solomon Drayton's back. Tyron blinked hard, pushing back tears. This wasn't the time. The line crept forward, names echoed. The clapping resumed, like someone had pressed play after a pause. But the mood had changed. It wasn't about decorations or photo ops anymore. It was about dignity. An assistant principal tapped Tyron's shoulder and said something, but he barely registered it. He nodded. The student beside him leaned over, whispering, "That your dad?" Tyron didn't reply. He didn't need to. The entire gym had witnessed it, and now everyone there understood who Solomon Drayton was. Back in the crowd, Creed remained standing. He wasn't seeking praise or attention. His eyes were on Solomon. Still seated in that same molded plastic chair, hands relaxed on his knees, eyes forward like nothing had happened, but something had. The other SEALs stayed upright as well, not in defiance, but as a presence. Their silence spoke louder than any speech could. A few parents began applauding more enthusiastically with each name read, like they were trying to push away what had just happened with something better. The gym felt alive again, roused by a wrong, steadied by a show of loyalty. Solomon didn't stand, he didn't glare or seethe, he just sat, a father watching his son cross one more threshold into manhood. Yet the moment that would cut through everything still lay ahead. And when Tyron's name was finally announced, the room wouldn't be able to pretend any longer. The line of students was moving quicker now, some still adjusting their caps, whispering quiet jokes, trying to savor it all, but Tyron's thoughts were elsewhere. His mind kept circling back to his father, sitting alone amid the crowd, yet so grounded in that seat as though it had been placed there just for him. There was something in the way he carried himself, steady, silent, unwavering, and something in how those men, those soldiers, had stood around him without a word or command. For the first time, Tyron understood that he didn't fully grasp the weight his father bore. Sure, he'd seen the photographs, the ribbons stored in that wooden box, the carefully folded flag resting on the living room shelf, but none of those things ever spoke. They simply existed like still artifacts. Today they moved. Today they stood. The assistant principal called another student's name, and then another. Tyron was now only 3 places from the stage. He rubbed his palms on his gown, trying to calm his breath. The girl in front turned to him with a nervous smile. "You ready?" Tyron grinned faintly. "More than you know." He stepped forward. Across the gym, Solomon leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on the stage. He didn't clap for every graduate, not out of disrespect, but because his vision had narrowed to just one figure in a black gown with red and white cords, a boy who resembled his mother when he smiled. One name passed, then another. The announcer paused briefly, cleared her throat, and delivered the next name with more weight than before. Tyron Drayton. The name echoed. A breath of stillness followed, less than a second, before the gym broke open. Applause, cheers, whistles surged. But what set it apart wasn't the volume. It was the cadence. The sound had purpose. It wasn't noise, it was unity, depth. The 6 SEALs, still on their feet, clapped in sync, hands rising and falling with precision. Every clap landed with strength, not showmanship, but reverence, a salute without formality, a message: we see you, we see your father, and we honor you both. Tyron walked the stage with calm determination, chin lifted, pace solid. His heart raced, not from nerves but from pride, and not just pride in himself, but in the legacy of his last name, the man who had shaped it. He took the diploma, shook hands with the principal, then turned to the audience. His eyes scanned until they found one man. Solomon didn't rise or wave. He simply met his son's gaze and offered the smallest yet most powerful smile of the day. Tyron gave a single nod and stepped down. The clapping hadn't faded. Parents who'd sat quietly all ceremony now cheered loudly. Some stood. A few dabbed their eyes, unsure why, but sensing they'd just seen something significant. Solomon leaned back in his seat and let the feeling settle in. He wasn't the type to cry in public, but inside something gave way, not sadness, not hurt, just release, the kind that comes when a circle feels finished, even if it never really is. The names continued, but something had changed. From that point on, each graduate walked the stage in the afterglow of what had just occurred. Not because it was dramatic, not because it would go viral, but because it was genuine. Still, the story didn't end with applause. When father and son reunited outside the gym, it would be more than a proud embrace. It would be a passing of something much deeper. 20 minutes later, the final name was spoken. The entire room stood as caps flew. Shouts of joy rang out, and students clung to each other like lost friends. Phones flashed, cameras clicked. Balloons floated overhead as the class began filing through the double doors out to the back parking lot. Solomon didn't rise immediately. He stayed seated as the noise swirled around him, taking in the music, the laughter, the blur of silver and red gowns flowing past. His eyes followed Tyron disappearing into the hall with the others. A teacher gave the boy a high five. Another pulled him in for a quick hug. Yet even with all the commotion, Tyron turned back, just once, and looked over his shoulder. Solomon saw it, a fleeting glance but filled with meaning. "Did you see me?" And Solomon's look returned the answer, "Every second." The crowd began thinning, families stepping out with bouquets and balloons, offering congratulations in joyous, echoing bursts. Solomon rose slowly, stretching out his legs, the stiffness from sitting too long setting in. As the gym began to empty, Creed approached. He didn't speak immediately, just exchanged a glance with Solomon before shifting his gaze toward the door. "You all right?" Creed asked eventually. Solomon gave a nod. "I've faced worse." Creed gave a faint smile. "Doesn't mean it should have gone down like that. No." Solomon agreed, "It shouldn't have." Javier Meeks, another SEAL, walked over. We tried to keep it low profile, but once he moved toward his belt. Solomon raised a hand gently. "You all did what was needed. That was more than enough." The three men stood in place for a few lingering moments, allowing the noise to fade away. Then Solomon spoke. "I need to see my son." Outside, the sunlight beat down hard on the pavement, stretching long shadows from the bleachers into the lot. Students grouped together in clusters, napping pictures, tossing caps again, shouting across the space to relatives. Tyron stood near the flagpole, gown unzipped halfway, diploma folder in one hand, phone in the other. When he noticed his father heading his way, he broke off mid-conversation. Everything else fell into the background. They met halfway. Tyron spoke first. "You good?" Solomon nodded. "And you?" "Yeah." Tyron replied, then cast his eyes downward. "I saw what happened. They tried to move you." "I know." Solomon said. Tyron's jaw tightened. "I was this close to walking off that stage. I swear I was about to say something." Solomon rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's exactly why you didn't." Tyron looked up. "What do you mean?" "Because you trusted I could handle it, and because you handled your own moment like a man. You didn't let them steal it." Tyron inhaled deeply. "Those guys who stood up, who were they?" Solomon glanced back. The 6 SEALs were now outside too, gathered near the doors, speaking quietly. They weren't seeking attention, just keeping watch like they always did. "They're men I shed blood with, men who understand loyalty, men who remember," Solomon said. Tyron nodded, his voice low. "That was something. Powerful." "It had to be." Solomon replied. "There are times when silence roars louder than any voice, and standing without a word can speak volumes." They stood in silence for a stretch. Then Tyron grinned. "So, are you gonna start telling me those stories now?" Solomon chuckled. "Some of them. You're old enough now to hear the real ones." They stood side by side, not just father and son, but 2 men bonded by an experience that could never fully be explained, only felt. Across the lot, Creed raised his hand, not to wave, but in a silent nod of respect. Tyron returned the gesture instantly. Though the sun climbed higher in the sky, for the Draytons, time had started to shift in a new way. But one moment still remained, one lesson left unspoken. Most of the crowd had filtered out by the time Solomon and Tyron reached the parking area. A few families lingered, laughing around lawn chairs, loading trunks with flowers and gift bags. The energy had quieted, and the light softened into the gold of early evening. Solomon unlocked the Charger, the same car his wife had once driven to school meetings and weekend trips. Tyron paused beside the passenger side, tracing a scratch near the handle. "She would have been the loudest one here today," he said quietly. "She'd have made you retake every picture until your smile looked right." Solomon replied, managing a small grin. They got in, doors closing behind them. The warmth inside made the car feel like a cocoon, sealed off from the noise outside. After a pause, Tyron turned toward his dad. "I gotta know. Why didn't you say anything to those guards? You just sat there." Solomon tapped the steering wheel once, then faced his son. "Because I don't need to prove who I am, and I don't have to raise my voice to be heard." Tyron looked out his window, taking that in. "You know how many times I've had to pick between staying calm or losing it," Solomon said. "That moment today, what they tried, that's not new, but how we respond, that's what shows who we are. But they disrespected you in front of everyone." Tyron pushed. "They did." Solomon agreed. "And everyone saw, but they also witnessed something else. They saw 6 men who had no reason to be here stand up, not because I asked, but because they understood the meaning of that moment." Tyron let those words sit with him. "Son," Solomon said, "life's gonna give you 100 chances to get angry, and sometimes you'll be right to feel that way, but more often, silence makes the deeper cut. Dignity lasts longer. That's what people carry with them." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded photo, the one of Tyron as a baby. His late wife held him in her arms in the photo. "I carried this through Kandahar," Solomon said. "I held onto it after losing your mother, and I brought it with me today, not because it makes me stronger, but because it reminds me what's worth standing up for." Tyron's voice softened. "You always knew who had your back." Solomon gave a quiet smile. "I didn't have to know. I just believed. Real men don't disappear when things get hard. They show up, and they stand firm." A brief silence passed before Tyron spoke again. "I want to be like that, like you." "You already are," Solomon replied. "You walked across that stage proud. You didn't let anger rob you of that moment. You stayed steady while the world tried to throw you off course." Outside, the last of the SEALs were heading to their vehicles. Creed cast one final glance toward the Charger before pulling away. Solomon gave a subtle nod, no words spoken, just a quiet recognition of something lasting. Tyron leaned against the seat. "So, what now?" Solomon turned the key. The car vibrated to life. "Now we go home. You pick where we eat." Tyron grinned. "Waffle House." Solomon let out a short laugh. "Of course." As they pulled out of the parking lot, the school disappeared in the rearview mirror. But what had taken place in that gym would stay with everyone who witnessed it. For Tyron, that day would become more than just graduation. It marked a deeper truth, that being a man had little to do with how loud you are, and everything to do with how you hold yourself when no one's looking. Some shout to be noticed. Others sit still and are remembered forever. If this story left an impression on you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs the reminder this is what true strength really looks like.